Hey guys, Saf here with another Raid Shadow Legends video. In today's video, I want to take a look at Mighty Ukko's passive. So I have been doing some reading into the skill descriptions. I've watched a few content creator videos, and I have seen a bit of backlash from the community in terms of, you know, you told us this champion was amazing and now his passive is not working as amazing as we once thought. So I want to cover that as well as I want to give you the information as to why the passive isn't actually doing what it's meant to be doing. And I personally think this could be potentially a bit of a bug or a bit of a bad way of coding the passive. So let's first talk about the backlash topic. I've seen many posts basically saying, you know, content creators tricked us, content creators overhyped this champion, content creators weren't accurate. I do want to kind of give a point out and say content creators basically read this champion and make our own opinion based on our knowledge of the game. So when I read a champion's sort of splash art that they give us at the start, I'm looking at what it says. I don't have any context in terms of how the skill works until it goes live. So I'm giving my initial thoughts. So when we talk about what we get as content creators, we get this kind of image that they put together now, which is pretty good to be fair. However, we are only just reading the skill descriptions. There's no context to how it works. And when you read the passive, has a 50% chance of stealing one random buff from an enemy each time they receive a buff. Any stolen buff becomes protected. That sounds really powerful because effectively it reads as if anytime someone gets a buff, I have a 50-50 chance of taking it off them. Anytime. That is extremely powerful. But the nuance here is once you get the champion, we have access to the code, we have access to the way, you know, to play testing. Myself, I don't have access to a test server. So when we sit here and say this champion is going to be amazing, this is our opinion. It can always change. And I don't think that's content creators misleading the community. I think that's just a natural issue of not really having access to all the information up front, or to some extent, inaccurate skill descriptions as well. So let's talk about this passive here that we've got going on. They have now updated the actual skill description because I'll be honest, Plarium have kind of butchered multiple attempts at trying to explain the issues with this passive. I'm going to try and simplify it in a really clear language so that it's easy to understand. But I did want to shout out that obviously they have updated it now where it says, will only attempt to steal one buff for each type of buff placed simultaneously. For example, only one random buff may be stolen if 3 veil buffs are placed at the same time. That's actually not correct even there. That's not the actual issue here, but it kind of is byproduct the actual outcome. It's still not the right way to describe it. So let's talk about the actual way that this passive is working and why it's not working as we all thought it would. So I've put bullet points here to explain in specific natures how this passive works. The passive will activate on any buff placement effect, and that is individual buff placement attempts. So if you have something like a Sifi, which places 3 buffs, you get 3 opportunities, 3 separate opportunities of stealing a buff, 1 for each buff placed per target. So if you have a team of 4, then obviously that's going to be 3 attempts per target times 4 targets, 12 each, you know, individual attempts. It will only work on buff placement. So that means a self buff, a single target buff, or an AoE buff. It will not work if the buff was stolen, transferred, or spread. They are different coded effects. They do not operate the same way, and they are not applicable to this passive. So therefore, the Mischief Head, you can't re-steal the buffs that he's stolen using the passive, but you can remove him with his A2. That's an important distinction specifically for Hydra, where it's one of his best areas. Once the passive activates, he has a 50% chance of stealing one non-protected, existing, or new buff. And when I mean new buff, I mean the buff being placed. And that is a non-protected one. However, if a champion placing the buff has protection set, it can still steal the buff before it is protected by the set. The way it kind of flows is buff is placed, Ukko attempts to steal, if steal the buff. Then if it doesn't steal, the protection set activates and protects the buff after it is placed. That's kind of the way that that works. Now, obviously, as it can steal existing buffs, some people have said, oh, how did it steal the stone skin after 2 turns? It will keep looking to try and steal any buff on the target. The activation activates the passive. It doesn't necessarily mean that the buff being placed has to be the one that it's trying to steal. And this is why I was saying the passive is incorrect the way they've rewritten it, because it is not actually about the buff being placed rather than a buff is being placed. It has to be any buff placement That's what triggers the passive. Now, here is the important point and the problem that nobody really knows about because the descriptions are terrible. Existing protected buffs on Mighty Ukko. This is a new effect. It's not really existing on any other champion. I think this little coded snippet exists on the Mischief Head only. Has an effect which checks whether or not the existing protected buffs can be upgraded. Now, obviously, when he steals those buffs, he protects them so it can't be restolen. But the nature of a protected buff means normally, unless it's protection mode 0, it's very difficult to influence it on your own team. This is the difference between something like Bolster, which is protection mode 1, which means you can't even grow that shield, you can't extend it, you cannot do anything with Bolster at all, versus something like a traditional protected buff, which can be extended, which can be manipulated in some ways. What happens when he protects it? Well, he's protecting it in that protection mode 1, which means you can't really do anything. And then because of the can upgrade mode, this new clause, what it basically means is he can't upgrade the buffs he already has on himself. We know there's a finite amount of various buffs he can steal. If he cannot replace the existing one until it fully elapses, then obviously it's not going to work. And here's the other distinction. It's a buff steal, which means that the effect of placing the buff happens in the same attempt at stealing. Where normal buff champions, someone like Siphi, will basically place buff in separate effect containers, the steal is basically an attempt to steal and place in the same container. So if he cannot upgrade, he therefore cannot steal, which means that the champion keeps the buff. So where they're trying to explain, okay, I've placed 3 buffs, I can only steal 1. Yes, that's true, because he can't upgrade the existing veil he's just stolen. But that doesn't mean he shouldn't be able to still attempt to steal the buff, in my opinion. So this is where the problem has come in. Effectively, he can only ever steal 1 buff of that variety. Even though Siphi places 3 buffs on 4 champions, you can only ever steal 3 of those buffs in totality. And when you factor in then it's a 50% chance to do that, that 3 becomes 1.5. And this is where, when we've play tested him now, he goes, well, why isn't the passive as strong as it sounds? Because of this can upgrade model. If he was able to upgrade those buffs, then he would have much more power, and potentially that is something that they should change. I don't see a problem of re-stealing an increased defense buff if I'm going to increase my duration. And I think this is the issue that we have got currently. So I'm going to take my Mighty Ukko. He's only level 17 because I am still building him up. It's straight into another fusion. As most people realize, it's no downtime for building champions. I've got him at around about 400 accuracy right now. I haven't upgraded his artifacts. He'll probably end up around about 500 accuracy by the end of this. Pretty fast, around about 239 speed. Just a kind of a standard arena debuffer style build where the focus is on accuracy and speed. But I have built in with a bit of defense as well because I want him to be able to go in a Hydra and take a few hits. That's my long-term goal with him. But for the time being, what I want to do is look at his passive here. So we're going to see if we can find some buff teams that we can see if we can steal. So let's take a look here. Let's see if we can look at this team. Now it's going to die very quickly. We know I'm going to try and put him in a defensive team just so that we can take a few hits here. Let's put in I doubt any of these things are going to matter, but we can probably put a bolster set in, another shield set. Let's put in a Asuga. Where is my Asuga? She's in here somewhere. There we go. Throw that in there. And then we're going to throw in Mighty Ukko. He might just die. We'll see how it goes. But what we want to do with this team is just see how he's stealing the buffs. He should steal at least 1 increased attack and probably at least 1 increased speed. But we should notice that he'll only steal 1 of them. So at most 2 buff steals happen and everyone else should keep them. Now obviously in this team, if we manage to steal the increased attack off Trunder, that's pretty powerful. It's pretty good. So I'm going to slow it down. So he's managed to steal 1 increased attack, 1 increased speed, but he can't steal the rest. And the reason why is because he cannot upgrade them. So even if we get more buffs coming out here, like he didn't actually steal the block debuffs, which is just unlucky, I guess. We missed on all 4 attempts. We'll just boost this forward. It's the great thing about a bolster set here. You know, we can keep a level 17 alive pretty comfortably. Why damage dealers are not so great anymore. Now, if you notice, the decreased buff duration did not happen there because they're protected buffs. You can't reduce the duration. It's protection mode 1. We're just going to bring everyone back alive. Now, he will start dying because effectively his buffs Again, you see, we've stolen the increased speed here we've placed the increased speed. We can't actually steal the increased speed now because we already have an increased speed on the champion. So we can never steal an increased speed buff. This is the problem. I'm going to rerun this again and hopefully we can show that impact. I missed that just then. But the idea here is really we want to be stealing that increased speed every single time, regardless of whether we can upgrade it. That's what the whole passive should do. But it's not doing that because I can't upgrade an existing buff I already have, even if it's a non-protected buff. So we're going to rerun this fight now, see how it goes again. So we're going to go and see a buff being placed, bolster. We didn't steal an increased attack, nor did we steal an increased speed, but we did steal the the block debuffs from the A2 from Ceres because she places that. And now we're in this position where we're just trying to see what happens. So the power of Mighty Ukko, by the way, is this. Complete buff removal. Incredibly powerful A2. Never mind the passive issue, the A2 is still really strong. So I'm going to run this battle again. Let's just keep testing this here, see how it works. We'll run it on one time. We're going to see what he steals. So we managed to steal a buff off Trunder. We stole an increased speed off Ceres, but you can see we're only stealing one because we can't steal or replace or upgrade an existing one. So that's the issue with his passive. Now, do I think they need to change it? In an ideal world, we'd be able to continuously upgrade those abilities. But I think actually on paper, it's not that problematic. Now, for this champion, I actually think his best ability is his A2 ability. The ability to basically remove 4 buffs and then place block buffs, so long as you can get rid of all the other buffs. Now, I appreciate that obviously there is now an arena meta where removing buffs is much more trickier. You've got stone skin, protection sets, bolster sets. You know, these things can actually cause a problem. However, in sort of a non-PvP setting, this is actually really, really crazy, especially for things like Hydra. If you lose control, you can recover, especially for things like high Doom Tower waves. The other nice thing about this champion for a progression state is it's a double AoE champion. So if you're in the mid game, you can run stun set, you can run a taunting set or something of that nature, and you'll be able to get some crowd control because every ability he does will AoE damage. I actually think that the passive has taken all the attention, but as a kit overall, for a new champion coming into this game, this is the best progression champion I have seen in a very long time. AoE revive, buffs. Not very often many champions have a block buffs out there. Also an AoE A1 decrease attack on a 75% chance, but you could run him unbooked. Definitely a great champion. So there you go, guys. I wanted to give you a bit more detail as to how the passive is actually coded, try and break down the way that they've explained it in different ways. I hope that cleared up for you how the passive works, and hopefully you will find some value in your Mighty Ukko if you are feeling a little bit like you've regretted it. I think he's still really good for Hydra. I will probably do a video on him in Hydra once I have an opportunity to get some masteries and build him up. But with that said, I will catch you in the next video.